Welcome, Commander. This is Brightwood from Oracle Station, bringing you our crew analysis of TripTucker from the Star Trek series Enterprise. Star Trek Fleet Command brings us TripTucker in the first arc of the year 2024, Enterprise Part 1. This is the last Star Trek IP that has not appeared in the Star Trek Fleet Command game. So let's get into TripTucker and see what he brings us with the addition of this IP to STFC. Trip is an epic officer. His division is engineering. Trip's faction is Federation. And his in-game group is Enterprise NX-01. Charles Trip Tucker III is the chief engineer on the United Earth Starfleet's Enterprise NX-01. Trip is another epic officer in Star Trek Fleet Command that does not have a captain's ability. This is fitting since although he has aspired as a child to be a captain, because of influences in his life, he decided to focus on engineering. This will make Trip's captain's ability Chain of Command, indicating that Trip does not have a captain's maneuver. So equipping Trip in the captain's chair will provide no benefits. Trip's officer ability is Things Blow Up. When you take damage from a hostile or another player, TripTucker decreases your opponent's critical damage by 50% for 2 rounds. This ability can stack, and it does not trigger at armadas and assaults. This goes up to 250% when it gets to Commander. This is an impressive ability at higher operation or higher crew level, but keep in mind that with the prime critical deck floor, he cannot reduce the critical damage below your opponent's critical prime floor value, and that can be up to 200%. I can see this having value in base defense and will be very subjective to your opponent's ship's crew and your ship and crew as well. Because Trip does not have a captain's ability, he does have a below the deck ability, and that is Hand in the Cookie Jar. This will increase how much resources you get from destroying Hydrogen and Species 8472 hostiles by 30% at base, going up to a very impressive 150% at Commander. Commanders who are still working the Voyager loop are going to find huge value in his below the deck ability, and this may be where he benefits a majority of commanders in the game. As we get into testing, we will learn more about how well each of these abilities will benefit us. Before we do that though, let's take a look at TripTucker and ATAs. As an epic officer, Trip will have 3 ATA traits, and those traits are Engineer, Charismatic, Specialist. As always, I will keep this as a high-level review of ATAs. To really understand the value of Trip for your ATA needs, you'll want to review the ATAs he's eligible for and determine their value to you. You can do this with the Amazing Officer tool put together by Stewie Doo and Lube. The link to the tool is in Oracle Station's Discord. Now, let's get into Trip's ATA traits and see if we want to use our valuable ATA trait XP on him. There are a lot of officers that have the engineering trait. The engineering trait has a good mix of epic to uncommon officers available to you. As always, the epic officers have the best uses in ATAs. The ATAs available for engineering or engineers trait are Accelerated Bioforming, Experimental Procedures. This scales with your ops. Gas Contractor, also an ops scaling ATA. Geological Evaluation for Gas, geothermal conditioning for gas rewards, planet-side shipyards. This will get you ship parts and blueprints, salvage operations for battleship parts, explorer parts, interceptor parts, and survey parts. Scientific breakthrough, which is for ops 30 plus, sensor analysis for ops greater than 20, and terraforming expedition. Personally, I don't find much of a reason to try and critical a lot of these ATAs. The resources they provide have sourcing in other areas in the game, and the amount netted does not offset the time the crew is away for me. This, of course, is my opinion and is reflective of my situation. It very much could differ for you. I do find some value in planet-side shipyard, which would earn us ship parts, but I won't try to create or get this to go critical. The salvage operations are always good to send crew on, and if you really need the ship parts, criticals could be beneficial. Again, I do not try too hard to critical them, I just send crew that I don't care about to gain the resources. Terraforming expedition, however, I'm very interested in, as it gets you Federation reputation and on a critical Federation credits. Charismatic has some very appealing ATA missions. Those are Cultural Exchange, which gives us some Fed credits and ship parts. First Contact, which is Federation rep and credits. Form Trade Agreement, Host Ambassador, Peace Treaty A and Peace Treaty B. Research and Development, another one that gives us Fed credits on a critical. Senate Hearing, which gives us Romulan rep and credits. Undercover Mission, which is Romulan reps and credits. And Warzone Reclamation, which is interceptor parts and blueprints. These are all good ATAs. So far, Trip has not given us any real reason yet, though, to invest straight XP into them. Most of these ATAs are, well, we probably have other officers we can already invest in and better multiple traits for ATAs. A lot of these are valuable ATAs, though. And you do want to have an officer who is XP'd up on this trait. Our final trait is Specialist. The following ATAs require the Specialist trait: Arbiter of Succession, Forensic Investigation, Investigate Borg Signal, Peace Treaty A and Peace Treaty B, Tal Shiar Inquisition, and this is for Ops below 50 and changes it Ops 50 plus, and Warzone Reclamation. Now we're starting to see some ATAs repeat themselves, indicating we have two traits on Trip, increasing his potential on these ATAs. Peace Treaty A and B are both 5-day ATAs, something I'm not really fond of sending crew on. These 5-day ATAs really seem to not have the return, especially when you're sending an epic officer on them for the specific rewards they give us. Because of this, I don't find value in the Ultra Recruit tokens we get from them. Also, we get a lot of these resources from events and other sources in the game. So consider your current acquisition rate for the rewards to the amount in these ATAs. Critical on these gives some good crew shards though, but all of them have some sourcing in the game. Newer commanders may find more value in the B variant for Pike shards of Peace Treaty if they're working to max Kelvin Pike. But he does well for commanders at any level, so there's no real reason to have to really push his progression. Warzone Reclamation is also a 5-day ATA. So again, think of your current sourcing for interceptor parts before sending officers off on this ATA. The blueprints on the critical may make this more appealing when you decide if you want to send the required officers to critical the ATA. I will point out for all three of these ATAs that by combining Trip and Kang with maxed out traits would offer the highest critical rate using only 2 officers, allowing you to put a third to boost the key ATA stats, defense or health, as high as possible, increasing your potential rewards on return. Oracle Station is going to rate TripTucker's interest in ATAs as a medium. This really is because he can maximize your potential on 3 ATAs for criticals using only 2 officers, reducing the amount of officers you would have to send to max crit these. However, it's important to consider that these are 5-day ATAs, and do you really want to lose the use of him over that period, or for that matter, both of these officers over that period? So now that we have reviewed TripTucker's profile, what do we think are his advantages and disadvantages before we get into the actual application of them in our crews? For advantages, below the deck, the increase of loot from species 8472 and hydrogen is actually pretty nice and is going to help officers who are still really engaged in the Voyager loot. His officer ability has potential, but now we also have a critical damage floor to contend with, which kind of offsets his benefit there. The officer ability is against players and hostiles, so that is kind of nice. And I really like the fact that he has good ATA traits and they double up. But again, we have to consider losing him over the period of time because most of these are 5-day ATAs. The disadvantages I see with him, again, let's go back to the critical floor. That counters his officer ability. With the short PvP cycle, battles are really kind of too short for Trip to really build up. He doesn't work on armadas. For him to work, we must take damage in order to get him to trigger. And the loot gain is limited to hydrogen and species 8472. With the release of the Xindi at the same time as TripTucker being added to the game, it would have been nice to see the Xindi loot drop increase as also part of TripTucker's below the deck ability. It seems that for TripTucker, for every advantage there is a matching disadvantage, so it's very hard to get a read at how good TripTucker is going to be. The one good thing though is that he doesn't have a counter or a disadvantage for his loot increase for species 8472 and hydrogen. It would be again very nice to have seen the Xindi included in the loot increase since they were released at the same time as TripTucker, but this would have just been an added bonus to his below the deck ability. Considering the current number of rounds battles, PvP battles that is, tend to last, and the new critical damage floor prime, as well as the boons available, TripTucker's officer ability really feels weak, limiting the available uses that his officer ability will actually see benefits in any kind of combat. This makes it very hard to find any real way for TripTucker to be used outside of grinding Voyager refinery loot. So let's see how we're going to be able to get the best use out of TripTucker. Now that we know that he is a PvP and PvE officer when it comes to placement on the bridge, and we also know that his usage below the deck is very specific, increasing our loot with hydrogen and species 8472. So since this seems to be the easiest usage of him, let's start with below the deck ability for TripTucker. Using TripTucker below the deck just means that we need to put him below the deck. This is a fairly simple and straightforward thing to get use of him below the deck, right? He doesn't require any synergy or any type of support from our ships or crew to be able to work. All that he requires is that you're hunting hydrogen and species 8472. So that said, let's look at how he is intended to be used, and that's going to be, of course, on our Voyagers while we're farming hydrogen and 8472 hostiles. So let's open up our Voyagers and set up our crew so that we will get a maximum return from these two hostiles. I like to run two separate crew setups. I have one for hydrogen hunting and I have one for species 8472. The reason for this is that I want to maximize my return on species 8472, because not only do we have to kill them to get the rewards, you also have to use a resource to get them to spawn, and that is deuterium canisters, to be specific. The acquisition of deuterium is metered, so you only get a set amount per period of time. This is why it's important that we get a maximum return for this deuterium. So keeping that in mind, we're going to create a crew build on our Voyager that's going to maximize our deuterium cost to loot acquisition for species 8472. My maximum loot build for Voyager against 8472 is going to have Enterprise E Picard in the captain's seat. His captain's maneuver will increase the amount of loot our hostiles drop by 1% based upon his level. We'll put beside him Neelix. Neelix is an essential officer to have in the officer seat, and that's because he's going to reduce the cost of our deuterium canisters by 1% based upon his level. And that reduction is very good. And then on the other side seat, we'll put 5 of 11. She is going to increase the amount of loot that's dropped. That completes the bridge crew. So now let's put together our below the deck crew, which is going to be just as important as the officers that are on the bridge. The reason they are just as important is because they're going to give us the mitigation that we need to be able to effectively hunt the 8472 efficiently, based upon our bridge crew not having any mitigation or damage modifiers. So here is where we put TripTucker in. As we know, he's going to increase the loot drop by species 8472. Next, we'll put Tom Paris. Tom Paris is going to increase our armor, shield deflection, and dodge by 1% of our defense. That percent is based upon his level. This will give us a mitigation on our below the deck build. Beside Tom Paris, we will put Harry Kim. Harry Kim's going to hopefully create morale state, which will increase the amount of isolic damage that our Explorer class ship, Voyager, is going to actually produce. We'll then put the Doctor, who's going to help increase the amount of loot that is dropped by the species 8472 as well. We'll put Rutherford in, who's going to increase our shield health, which is just going to give us more shield to allow Paris to work even better. Hugh is going to increase our critical chance, and then we're going to put Odo or Enterprise E Troy to increase the amount of critical damage that we're creating. Now, not all of us are going to have every single crew slot unlocked on our Voyager. I am lucky enough that I have maxed out my Voyager already. So this gives me a really nice complement of below the deck crew to help me hunt species 8472. The below the deck crew in the order of my preference. This may not be your order of preference because you may have officers that are higher levels and they may benefit you more below the deck. But ultimately, I think the two that you want to try and get below the deck in this case, of course, is going to be TripTucker and then Tom Paris. Without Tom Paris, I noticed significant reduction in the number of species 8472 that I can combat while trying to farm them. Alternatively, on the bridge, we can replace Enterprise E Picard or 5 of 11 to either improve our overall performance or with alternative crew if we don't have Enterprise E Picard or 5 of 11 available to use. But of the 3 bridge officers, Neelix is the one that you're going to want to have on the bridge. His reduction in the cost of your deuterium canisters almost equates to 2/3 increase in the loot from species 8472 hostiles. That is more of an increase than Enterprise E Picard and a max 5 of 11. Hydrogen setup. We really just wanted to change our bridge officers because our below the deck officers should be good for us in both scenarios. So on the bridge, I prefer to run the following crew. I'm going to put Catherine Janeway in the captain's seat because she's going to divert or increase our shield mitigation for 1 round cumulative every time we take damage from a unique weapon. Her officer ability is going to increase our isolated cascade damage as well, so this is very nice. To support Catherine Janeway, we're going to put Enterprise E Data in an officer's seat, and he's also going to increase the amount of isolated cascade damage that we're going to do against the hostiles. In this final side seat, we could run 2 different officers if we choose. If you're struggling against the level of hydrogen that you're attacking, you can put the Doctor on next to Janeway. He's going to increase your mitigation, and he's also going to add synergy boost to Catherine Janeway's captain's ability. If you're not struggling and you want to increase your loot drop a little bit more, you could use 5 of 11. That gives us a good below the deck setup with 2 crew builds that we could use TripTucker to help increase our loot with the hydrogen and species 8472. But now let's see what we can do with TripTucker on the bridge. And honestly, I am a bit grateful that I took time to getting this video completed. So let's dive into crewing TripTucker on the bridge, and we should see why I'm glad there was a little bit of delay in the production of this video. When it comes to grinding hostiles with TripTucker, we have a lot of really good crew builds already. So you might be struggling to really find a reason to use TripTucker in your hostile grind crew. But if you do want to use TripTucker to grind some hostiles, here are some ideas. In both of these suggestions, I'm going to be trying to maximize the performance of TripTucker against the hostiles. So to do this, there are 2 captains that come to mind, and they're going to establish the foundation for these 2 crew builds. So let's start with one of our more common grinding crew setups, and that's going to be our PMC/T builds. And instead of Chen or Talon, we're going to actually use TripTucker. Why are we running this? Is because Trip is going to receive a boost from Kelvin Pike to increase the performance of his critical damage reduction against the hostiles. Trip actually doesn't work too bad in this setup, but it's also not an optimal setup. And the reason is because in order for Trip to work, one actually triggers once we take damage, but we need the enemy to throw crits to reduce their attack damage. So as you see here, there are several shots from this particular Zindi, and well, it only went round 1, so we really didn't get the reduction to the critical damage. So kicking it up to a higher level, and I basically sequentially went up to 57s here just to see what it's like, and consistently we didn't get enough critical shots to really justify putting Trip in the side seat next to Calvin Pike. And alternatively, we could put in the side seat, instead of Calvin Pike, we could actually run the Picard build, which would do pretty much the same thing, right, with Jean-Luc Picard as captain, and then we could put Beverly in the side seat to give us some mitigation, and then we'd put TripTucker over onto the other side seat to get the benefit from Picard's captain's maneuver. And we would pretty much see the exact same results from TripTucker in that run as well. So, you know, he does work. He does do fairly well in mitigating the critical damage from our hostiles, but the biggest issue here is depending on the hostiles' critical chance and the number of critical shots that they fire, it's really going to reflect on how much reduction in damage TripTucker is going to do for us sitting in a side seat. So in the end, not my favorite place to put TripTucker in this particular scenario. For hostile grinding, maybe on a hostile that tosses a lot more crits, he might be a lot better to put on the side, and we might see some hostiles in the future that do that. So definitely a crew to keep in mind when you are dealing with a hostile that actually fires a lot of critical shots. Because it does stack over 2 rounds, in this case 80%. Over 2 rounds, stacking can be a nice little reduction in the amount of critical damage that we receive. But as you can kind of see here, we're really just not getting those critical shots. And now for the final setup here, and this is where I really think that I kind of got excited about using TripTucker on the bridge. So on our Enterprise, fighting Zindi, let's put together, you know, we're in part 2 of the arc, so we've gotten our Jonathan Archer unlocked near towards, you know, over halfway through the arc, so hopefully we've gotten Jonathan Archer unlocked. So let's put Jonathan Archer on the bridge in the captain's seat, and then we'll complement him with TripTucker, so he's going to actually boost Archer's captain's maneuver, which is going to increase the amount of hostile you know, loot dropped from our Zindi hostiles by 300% plus the 100% from TripTucker. So this is actually going to be really nice increase to the amount of Zindi loot that we're going to get. And both of them have pretty decent officer's ability, right? So we'll throw 5 of 11 in the other side seat. Down below, we definitely want to run Tom Paris for his mitigation, since we just don't have any mitigation on here. And then, you know, I'm feeling a little greedy, so let's put the Doctor on the below the deck as well, just to get that extra bit of loot drop. So we're going to go ahead and throw our Enterprise NX-01 out here into this 42 aquatic system. So we're going to skip the lowest. We're going to toss it out here, and let's see how this actually does. Now, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a strategy when I put my Enterprise out here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grind out the interceptors, and then I'm going to, when I feel I've got enough cargo below the deck, I'm going to go ahead and try my luck on one of the aquatic battleships, and hopefully I'll defeat them. But because this is recording for video, most likely I'm going to get my butt handed to me by the aquatics battleship. So again, as you can see, I'm doing all right. This is a my Enterprise is a Tier 3 Enterprise NX-01. It has none of the extra components upgraded on it, so that means that there's no MK3 or MK4. They're all MK3 weapons. There's no MK4 upgrades on it. So it's doing fairly well. You can see I'm collecting quite a bit of loot with this build. Gonna definitely get plenty of loot to be able to do my pulls that I need to pull for the Enterprise arc. So this actually is where I got excited about using TripTucker. Obviously, you know, we had to unlock Jonathan Archer, but this really does kind of help with the loot acquisition for the NX-01 Xindi loop that was brought to us in the Enterprise arc starting at the beginning of the year, in January of 2024. As you can see here, I got Gutsy. I feel like I got a pretty good amount of cargo. I usually shoot for about 150k to plus. And I'm looking at my hull, and of course, we failed on the aquatic battleship. TripTucker is really nothing to write home about when it comes to PvP. The length of PvP currently in the game is just way too short for TripTucker to be able to spin up enough to be beneficial against other players. The one place we might be able to engage TripTucker in PvP activities might be in our base defenses. If you're looking for a crew member to round out one of your ships, you might get some benefit at putting TripTucker in an officer seat. I did try using TripTucker in my base defense during the last incursions, but what I found was that I mitigated the critical chance of my opposition way too effectively for Trip to really be of any kind of value in the side seat. Again, this is my situation with my research and my crew that I use in my base defense build. I really do suggest that you do some testing of your own, because you may find more value to using him, especially if you don't have the research and the crew to reduce the critical chance over your opposition. Overall, TripTucker is not a terrible officer. He's just very limited in the amount of use that you're going to get out of him. Where I think commanders are going to really find benefit with TripTucker is ultimately going to be below the deck when they are farming hydrogen and species 8472. The only other place that I see value of using TripTucker is when you're doing your Xindi and the synergy he provides Jonathan Archer by boosting Archer's captain's ability by 100%. It seems that the norm with new officers in the game has become that sourcing is usually limited to ARC events and other special events to earn their shards. There usually isn't a published or posted method of acquiring that officer day one. It's no different with TripTucker. There's been no published official acquisition method for getting TripTucker in the game when he was released or in part 2 of the Enterprise arc. Outside of special events and store packs, I would hope to see him in the final arc's event store. So watch for him there if you are really interested in acquiring or leveling up your TripTucker. Now that we've taken a look at how we can apply TripTucker, let's go back and re-review his advantages and disadvantages. I think our original list of his advantages might tweak a little bit with the addition of Jonathan Archer in Enterprise Part 2. Below the deck increase to 8472, and hydrogen loot is still probably going to be his top advantage to most commanders. He definitely increases the amount of loot that we get from these specific hostiles, so we can't really dispute him there. His officer ability still has potential, but now that we've seen him at work, I think it's going to be more beneficial to lower operation players than for players that are further along in their progression and have a lot more research and higher level crews or officers. Again, his officer ability is player and hostile related, so it does work in both those areas. He does benefit from the ATA traits doubling up on a few ATAs, and now with Jonathan Archer in the game, he's actually going to boost Archer's captain's ability, which increases the loot drop from the Zindi Aquatics, well, from Zindi altogether, by an additional 100% with the synergy. So I really think this is nice as well. And looking back at his disadvantages, I think we nailed him down pretty good after our review of his crew configuration. The critical floor kind of counters his officer ability, and with the short PvP battles, it takes way too long for it to build up. He doesn't work on any armadas, so he's useless there. And he must take damage, or we must take damage for him to trigger. And also, I am kind of disappointed that his loot gain is only limited to hydrogen and 8472. Now this does kind of get offset with his synergy ability to Jonathan Archer in the Zindi, which is what I kind of originally wanted when we first reviewed or broke down his advantages and his disadvantages. Commanders engaged in the Zindi Enterprise NX-01 loop are probably going to find that they might be using TripTucker more daily, especially if they've picked up Jonathan Archer in the Enterprise Part 2 of this arc. And for those of us that are still engaged in the Voyager loop, which does continue after you've maxed out your Voyager, we'll find that he's of value below the deck there as well. We won't be using him daily in this scenario, but he still is going to be of some use. Does this, though, make him an officer that we absolutely have to have? Really? This is going to be up to you, and I hope this crew assessment has helped you to make a decision on how valuable TripTucker might be to you. Oracle Station is going to rate TripTucker as a nice to have. Commanders will still be able to engage effectively in the NX-01 Zindi loop without TripTucker. And I was able to max my Voyager long before TripTucker became available to us. I was also able to do max pulls where I wanted to without him. He is a pretty nice addition to our officers collection, and he does have some neat animation, but this isn't going to be a reason for us really to shoot to acquire him, or probably to invest money in unlocking him. Check out our website for more videos, and join us in Discord using the link in the video description to continue the discussion and get access to more resources. We hope you found the video informative and helpful. If so, please give us a thumbs up and share. We look forward to your comments and suggestions. Live long and prosper, Commander. This is Brightwood from Oracle Station, signing off.